Alas, poor Yorick! I knew him, Horatio, a fellow of infinite jest, of most excellent fancy. He hath borne me on his back 1,000 times, and now he's gone and drank my spicy vodka. And I had none left, so I had to make more with his skull. Don't take my spicy vodka. It's mine. All mine. No, wait. Where were we?
Good evening, everyone. Sorry this is so late, but stuff happens. This is the first story that I'm going to be releasing for the 12 Days of Writing. However, this is actually the second written. The first one has been having some technical problems. It was written and it blew up, sadly. I'm an IT person and that's my best technical way of saying it. It blew up. I've been trying to recover without having to rewrite the entire thing from scratch, so that's why things really got dragged out here. But you know what? I'm moving forward. So my first story that I'm going to be releasing is now. This first story is one that I will likely revisit because it truly just became a life of its own. A good friend of mine actually sent the suggestions in a moment of frustration in her own circumstances. So I wasn't really having any plans for the kind of stories written, but it was kind of funny that the first one coming out is not one that is Christmassy themed at all in the slightest. However, it kind of went in very interesting ways. So this is called A Light in the Void. Pressure. An intensity that Ella had never experienced before suddenly flared in her brain, causing her to drop the glass of terrible Merlot that she had been gingerly sipping only moments before. It sloshed to the floor and accepted the opportunity to soak her brand new white sandals to an ugly purple. However, at the moment, she wouldn't care less even if she was able to see. The space around her just seemed to fade away, and a terrifying darkness engulfed her. It had seemed like a very routine flight. The Boeing 737-800 aircraft with a full complement of passengers had commenced on its journey from Pearson International Airport exactly on time for the over 2,500-kilometer journey to the northeastern tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. The skies had remained clear, and the extra sunshine through the windows brightened the spirits of everyone on board, who were all excited to get away from the Toronto chill to enjoy some time away with sun and sand. 1,000 kilometers into the flight, just after crossing the 35th parallel, a sudden low-pressure system generated an intense electrical storm directly ahead of the craft, forcing the pilots to react quickly and shift course slightly to the west. Things seemed to calm down until they passed over a very serpentine and jagged-looking body of water known as Lake Lanier, Georgia. Forcing her eyes through the pain and paralyzing panic, Ella realized that while everything still was dark and eerily silent around her, it wasn't quite black. She noted that a tarnished wave of light seemed to slowly begin weaving back and forth in her vision. No, not a wave, more like a tendril. It flowed in her vision, twisting and spinning. There seemed to be no pattern to the movements, whether from vertical or horizontal. It was shifting in size, intensity, and even color. Moments before, the breeze rustling through a small grove on the eastern shore of Three Sisters Island below went still. A large flock of starlings that had been sunning themselves on the branches there exploded into a western flight, leaving behind a cacophony of terrified shrieks. This scene was followed shortly by the rumble of every woodland creature in the vicinity, heading as far away as from the shore of a lake as possible. Even insects seemed to be on the move, and the air filled with the buzzing and screams of every possible description of life, until all was silent. 30 feet away from the shore, a previously shallow and placid area of water began to change. First there was a small set of bubbles, which grew into a roil. The water seemed to elasticate, stretching and growing in mass, but not flooding the land beyond. A whirlpool appeared, gaining in momentum and size as if a large plug had been pulled from the lake's bottom. Something indescribable began to rise from the middle of the vortex, and its sudden presence generated a wave of pressure and a deafening crack of sound. Nothing was around to experience this moment except for a single Boeing 737-800, which just happened to be directly 10,000 miles above, which is a little low for that craft normally, but the pilots were still making corrections to avoid the eastern storm. In her seat above, the pain in Ella's temples lessened a little, but sound was still muffled. No voices could be heard, only an ominous clicking. Then her eyes were drawn back to the strange object that she shared, a pressurized tube in the air with. She noted it had begun to split itself. Each tendril became 2, then 4, and onwards until a multitude of these things, possibly arms or even fingers, were dancing before her, each slow, plodding and meticulous, but also unique in their movements. Then she began to notice that more shapes were around her. She could make out the seats and fellow passengers slowly increasing in visibility towards the front of the cabin. No movement from anything other than for what now seemed to be a web of limbs. Then she noted that the shapes seemed to be interacting with the passengers. The limbs touched each person in turn, seeming to explore, analyze, and then move on in a disinterested manner. It was not a very friendly-looking sequence of movements. Rather, it seemed more predatory. They were hunting something, and they were coming her way. Ella was not a religious person, naturally, but she squeezed her eyes tight and prayed to whatever deity she can think of for the end of this nightmare. To pray for resolve, to pray for a savior. Then suddenly she heard a whisper to her left. "It's okay." With great difficulty, she worked to move her head to the side, and amazingly, even if while slow, she noted that she had regained a small amount of movement. However, what she saw certainly did not offer her any comfort. The passenger in 38A sitting there was an elderly lady who had seemed friendly enough during the flight. However, Ella was not in a very talkative mood, so tended to just nod and smile. Well, Agnes, yes, that was it. Agnes had talked for a while until nodding off. Now Ella noted that the tendrils had retreated from its web shape back into a single entity, and had set its sights directly on Agnes, who now appeared to be wrapped in this strange pale shimmer, and she was continuing to whisper what seemed to be a never-ending sequence of phrases in all kinds of languages, many of which Ella did not recognize. These were filled with a strength and emotion that didn't belong in what appeared to be such a frail body. And something began to change. The pain and pressure began to dissipate. Sound began to return. Light began to return. Suddenly, Ella felt a hand slip into hers, and she noted that Agnes had actually turned towards her. Through the flowing shapes and colors surrounding the older woman, Ella could still see her strong, pale blue eyes locked onto hers. Then Agnes smiled and spoke one last thing. "I choose to do this. There is a light in the void. It's you. Make it count." Then she was gone. Not dead, just gone. And even though reality suddenly returned to itself, Ella passed out. The next sequence of events were strangely anticlimactic. Nobody else on the flight seemed to remember anything strange happening. Just that there had been a strange sound, a dropped wine cup, and then what everybody thought was a drunk passenger. But when they landed the plane, it was discovered that a recently retired nun, Sister Agnes, was no longer on the flight. Ella knew where she went, and she really wanted to tell the authorities what she saw. But how would being considered insane and locked away really help? So she kept that part to herself, for now. Her and the rest of the passengers were allowed to leave to the resort destination from the airport, as there were no evidence of wrongdoing by anybody, but for bad head count by the pilot and stewards. However, there was a partial lockdown of ongoing flights for the next day while the airline did a full investigation. As Ella passed the security desk, she noted a group of travelers complaining about the terrible service caused by the disruption and how deeply it affected them. While observing them, Ella noted a shift in the air and could actually see the anger emitting off of all of these people as she spoke. Perplexed, she looked closer and saw it was like a miniature version of what she witnessed during the flight. Suddenly it was in her head, an understanding, whether through some preternatural ability or just good old common sense she didn't know, some event or buildup of rage had suddenly been released, and Agnes had saved everybody on the flight through her compassion and faith. Somehow Ella was connected in the moment, and she vowed to honor what sacrifice Agnes provided and work to help eliminate the forces that would generate such darkness and hate. Those who wanted to witness the end of an age. It was going to be a lot of work, but deep inside she knew she was not alone. Somehow she could still hear the phrases that Agnes spoke, and could even begin to whisper them herself. Not forgotten, never forgotten. Hope lives. I want to thank everyone for checking out the first entry of my 12 Days of Writing Challenge. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to Rose for the prompts today, and there's going to be lots more coming. Just watch. Here's my dog. Have fun.